Why don't you kick us off and then we'll get started.
That was 3:02 is when I start.
Oh, sorry. It's okay, by the way, everyone, it's okay to tell your boss what to do.
All right, well, it's 3:02. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming today and participating in our nudge conversation. Today, we'd like to, welcome everybody. Thanks. And we will have questions during this. Please type your questions into the chat box. That will give us a chance to take a quick look, but then I will call on you to ask your question directly, and then we'll handle the conversation that way. If we do not get to anybody's question, if we do not get to your question by the end, please make sure you put it in the chat box. We'll try to answer some of those on our social media. And we try to be respectful of everybody's time. So we do stop pretty much at 30 minutes. So without further ado, over to David.
Hey, thanks a lot, Chuck. So again, the standard format for this is about a 10-10-10 format. I'll spend about 10 minutes describing the nudge, why I put it out. Then we'll spend about 10 minutes having a discussion centered on the nudge, and then we'll open it up and have the final 10 minutes is kind of open game, whatever you guys want to talk about. So the idea behind today's nudge is to really highlight this magic word, intent. And the story I want to start with happened back in 2000 when the submarine Greenville, which was involved in an accident where they came up underneath a Japanese fishing boat and 9 people died, was also involved in another mishap. And that mishap was the submarine was driving into Saipan, and it was early in the morning. The sun wasn't quite up yet. And so they were looking out at the buoys ahead of them, and they got confused about the buoys. Now, Saipan is a coral atoll. So basically the ocean rises up very rapidly, and then it's super shallow. And there's a cut in the coral, which is the channel into the harbor. And they got the buoys confused. So the buoy that was supposed to be on the left was actually on the right. They left it to the right of the submarine. So they went on the wrong side of the buoy. They were outside of the channel, and they drove right up onto the reef. And there was a big Navy investigation, and the Navy investigation, of course, found a long litany of technical things which the submarine had done wrong. And I don't dispute any of those things, and those things are important. But once again, what we missed was the big thing, and it's because the mindset on the submarine was surface the ship, drive into port. In other words, there's not a deliberate circuit breaker or decision that happens between surface the ship and drive into port. And when the ship surfaced, they were running a little bit late, so they're kind of rushing to get people on the bridge, they're rushing to get the charts up. But the clock says 5 o'clock, you're supposed to be passing between buoys 1 and 2, and they're rushing to meet the time schedule. And we're just executing a series of events. And the way we show that is like this. Event 1, event 2. And I show it, this is red work. We're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. It's the next thing on the list, and therefore we do it. So the kind of things the submarine did here was surface, enter port. Here's another example. Clock says 10 o'clock, commence the operation. Now this could be an operation like we would call start the nuclear reactor. It could be medical procedure. 10 o'clock, commence gallbladder surgery on patient wherever. Here's another classic one we see in companies. Step 1, build a product. Step 2, launch the product. Again, the problem is there's no deliberate thinking between the two things. There's this momentum that builds in the sequence of events, and we view these things as one following immediately after the other. Build 730 Max software, launch 730 Max software. Not a deliberate decision. So what you want to do is inject a circuit breaker where we say, okay, the clock says 10 o'clock. Are we ready for the operation? Do we have the right patient? Do we have the right side, left or right? Is the team ready? And this is part of the certification process, and this is part of this is captured in this idea of intent. But it can be something kind of tactical like that, or it can be something like, okay, we've now built a product. Are we ready to launch the product? And have it be a deliberate decision to go to the next step. Now, one of the things this forces you to do is to decide where are the key decision points. Because if you applied this approach to every little thing that you did, wake up in the morning, get dressed, go to work, or maybe you don't have to get dressed anymore. Then what happens is we'll never get anything done. So we have to look at the sequence, and we have to say, well, what is the really important? Where's the sort of the point of no return? Some of them are obvious. If you're NASA, the point of no return is the final step before main ignition. But once you start main motor launch on the rocket launch, up to that point, you can reverse it. But after that point, you're on your way, whether it comes out good or bad. So you want the team to focus on what those key decisions are. And I can't tell you how many times on the submarine, I would ask my guys, and Andy and Chuck can tell you, to say, what is the decision we're trying to make? And many times we'd be focused on a minute level decision when we really should be focused on a bigger decision. I just had this example. I had a consulting call with my Google AdWords guy, and I kind of felt I was in the same thing. I don't know how many guys are doing AdWords, but it's relatively complicated. But in my mind, some things matter more than others. For example, the keywords that you use are really important. Whether you do a price extension, anyway, the guy has me like messing around in like third and fourth order issues in AdWords. Meantime, the things that really matter, whether we're going to be paying $2.50 a click or 75 cents a click or capturing the audience, we're missing. So the point is, it focuses the team on what the key decisions are. Build a product. Should we launch the product? And have that be a good debate, not, well, of course we're going to launch the product. It's the CEO's baby. So as you all probably know, intent is level 5 on the ladder, and we think it's magic for a number of reasons. As you move up the ladder, we say, hey, tell me, I'll tell you what to do. What do you see? What do you think? What would you like to do? And this is permission-based. And then intent shifts the onus to the team. When Andy would come up to me and say, Captain, I intend to realign the sonar system in a certain way, that meant he'd already had permission. I could veto it, but if I didn't say no, it meant yes. He would explain why it was the right thing to do, and he would explain how technically we were going to make sure we were doing it right. But in the absence of a response, let's say it's sort of weird to think about it by email, but let's just say send it by email, and I never respond. Hey, tomorrow at noontime, I intend to reconfigure the sonar system, and I did not respond. Guess what happens at noontime tomorrow? Andy reconfigures the sonar system. And this is one of the hugely powerful things about the word intent. So just to summarize some of the magic of what intent gives us, I'll go show you here. So intent is magic for all these reasons. First and foremost, the most important thing is it gives voice to empowered humans. Now, I think the word empowered there is actually redundant. All humans are already empowered. And again, what we see a lot of times is organizations are saying, well, I'll give a speech about empowerment. I'll give a lecture on empowerment. I'll make a poster on empowerment, but I'm actually not going to do the mechanisms of empowerment. And so this goes into our we act our way to new thinking, not think our way to new action, one of the principles of intent-based leadership. So it lets people use the language of empowerment. Number 2, it separates the decision maker from the decision evaluator. This is super important because we know that whoever makes a decision then their ego attaches to that decision. And when we have a debate about the decision, since the ego is attached to the decision, you're no longer talking about whether we should, we're no longer having a dispassionate conversation about whether we should launch the product or not. We're now having an emotional conversation about whether you respect me as the CEO of the company. And that's not helpful. So what you want is an organizational structure which separates the two roles of decision evaluator and decision maker. Typically, the decision evaluator is going to be the most senior person, the more senior person. And the decision maker should be the person below them, because the more senior person will be more likely to say, yeah, I don't think we should do that, than the other way around. And I've seen, so for example, a structure which doesn't work, in my opinion, is on a construction site and other organizations, because there's a mandate from OSHA to have a safety rep. We have a safety rep whose job it is to evaluate whether doing something is safe or not. So I was on a construction site a couple months ago, and they're moving from first floor concrete to second and third floor wooden structure. So it's a change in the nature of the work. They're up higher, winter's approaching, all these things are happening. The safety observer is the safety rep is trying to have some kind of influence over whether that we should move forward or not. It just seems like he's just a guy getting in the way, because he's not senior to the foreman on site. And it's a structure that doesn't work. On the submarine, there is no safety rep. The captain is the safety rep. The head operations person is the head safety person. No other structure works. Next, it informs, I'm sort of, some of these things are little dalliance rants, but anyway, maintain track. It informs the team member of upcoming action. So because we're stating aloud, hey, here's what I intend to do tomorrow, here's what I intend to do in 5 minutes, then the rest of the team knows what's happening. It's also a mechanism for both high communication and high empowerment. The problem is people say, well, I can have an even more empowered team. I'll just tell people they'll just say, I did it. Invoke the Nike rule. The problem with the Nike rule is communication takes a huge nosedive. But with intent, we get high communication and high empowerment. And it's also a mechanism for both distributed decision-making and unity of effort, which again, most organizations see these two things as tension. I can either micromanage people to death and get unity of effort, or I can let everyone make their own decision, but I get chaos. And intent is the way you get this and that. And then finally, what we talked about today is it injects mindful, deliberate decision-making into an operational sequence. And over again, we see corporate errors, bad corporate decision-making. It's not even, sometimes it's even too, it would be too generous to call it decision-making. We're simply doing the next thing in the sequence of events without a deliberate approach to decision-making. Now, some of these things we don't have transcripts of, so we can't say for sure, but the things that we do have transcripts of, for example, the black box recordings from ships and airplanes, it's often the case that they didn't even, the crew didn't even recognize they had reached the critical decision point. They're just marching through a sequence of actions. It's 9:57, push back from the gate, 10 o'clock, get permission from the tower to take off, 10:02, go full throttle on the engines, commence rollout. And so the number one thing for reducing errors is not to get people stricter about following a procedure, is to inject decision-making between the procedural steps. That is what I got. So let us now open up. I'd like to spend a few minutes focused on this particular nudge. Any questions, comments, or stories that you guys have? Go ahead. Let's have a little fun. Everyone just practice going in the chat. Say where where you are right now, what city you're in, and so we'll get a bunch of them, and that'll be kind of fun to see. and it'll also kind of break the logjam on the inertia over getting into the chat. Super. I see. Starting to see. Good. Okay, so Pat Hill. Pat Hill says many cases the timelines. Pat, unmute. Go ahead and take us through your thinking here.
Well, a lot of times, for those of us that are, say, middle managers, those deadlines and those product launch decisions are dictated to us. You will have this done by this day. And we're not necessarily in a position to say we're not ready, or we can say we're not ready, but sometimes the boss has other plans and has other priorities. So how do we navigate through these kinds of decisions where we're not necessarily the ones who have that ultimate responsibility?
Well, I'm not sure. You said we don't have the ultimate responsibility. Let's not quibble too much over that. But it sounds like what you're saying is, look, my boss says commence the operation at 10 o'clock. He or she's not going to be too happy when I walk in at 9:59 saying we're not ready.
Right. We got to get the ship underway this time, this day. Skipper, we can't get the ship underway at this time, this day.
Yeah. I don't think you want to make a habit of not being ready, but never not being ready is also not the right way to go. And I kind of go back to our story on the Santa Fe where we were setting up for a torpedo load. This is exactly what happened. Is at 10 o'clock we were supposed to commence loading torpedoes. So we did all the preps. We loaded all the gear. We connected all the cables. We got the crane going and all that kind of stuff. We weren't ready. We had an abnormal line. Something had changed. We hadn't fully evaluated it. We weren't ready, but we went ahead anyway. And we ended up dropping a piece of gear, which was very scary. Fortunately, no one was hurt. And I wish if someone had come to me as the captain and said, "Captain, we're not ready." It didn't happen. We all thought we were ready, but if they had, I needed to have the guts to be able to tell my boss, "We're not ready. We need to push it back an hour or a day." And you need to have the courage to say that. It's better than dropping a torpedo. Now, you're never going to guarantee, well, if you go ahead, will you drop the torpedo 100? No, you don't know. It's in the future. But what I want is to invoke the thinking and the process of making a deliberate decision about being ready. Part of the answer is don't wait till 9:59 to make sure you're not ready. I mean, make sure you're ready a day ahead of time or whatever it happens to be. But you're going to have to say, if you never go to your boss and say, "Hey, we're not ready," then you're not really making a decision. You're just doing the next thing on the calendar, my opinion. All right, how do I coach the transition to level 5? I'm just kind of going. Stephen, tell us about that.
So I have a small team of folks that are originally from India, as well as a couple other spots. And I've been showing them I brought up a lot of your videos and that. And what I'm trying to do is I'm really trying to push them into a position where they do something like this, where they stop and they think, because we do have very step-oriented processes.
Yeah.
I do want them to stop and think and come to me and say, we're not going to be able to meet what we said we were going to do because such and such. But I still, even in those, I still get a lot of those emails or Slack messages of, "We're stuck. Stephen, what do we do?"
Yeah.
And English is a second language. Culture is new. how do you manage that type of thing?
Yeah. So you're kind of giving me goosebumps here because we did a project with a major tech company in the United States, and they had a big office in Bangalore. So I went over there for a week and went through a big program with a bunch of the locals. So they had like a couple expats running it, Westerners, white guys, basically, and then they had all these Indians, and it seemed like it went okay. And then I came back, and then we were going to do these follow-up weekly. Were like weekly Zoom calls, and it was like I had never been there, and I was just like, "What is going on?" And I think a lot of it was, I think part of it was, while I was there, it was easy to just read my body language, and they were just saying what they thought I wanted to hear, and I kind of got duped into it or something. I
get a lot of that
curry or something, yeah. And then when I got back, it was harder, and so the wheels kind of fell off. So first of all, it's about safety. Everything is about safety in a situation like that, in my opinion. And always remember, small and choice makes it safe. Small steps in giving choice makes it safe. So you might not, and this is one of the things about the ladder that I like, is the first step is just description. Too many times we want people to go and say, well, they come to you and they say, what I really like is that you have evidence. You're talking about Slack messages and email messages. So you have evidence. So you can do weekly training and say, let me show you some really good, I wouldn't start with the bad ones, but try and find where someone has done it right, or re-script it and say, or just say, hey, here's what it looked like. Here's what it can look like. But it doesn't need to be, hey, here's a situation. Here's what we intend to do. That's not day one. That's day 95. Day one is, here's the situation. Here's what we see. Remember, step 2 is simply description. What do we see? And the reason it's like that is because description is processed in a part of the brain that's not connected to emotions, so it feels safe. Description is generally, if you say, well, tell me about the room, it's safe. Tell me about the client, it's safe. What should I do? Scary, because now I'm making a projection into the future. So I would just practice, return the problem unsolved. Say, well, tell me more. Simple, tell me more. How do you see it? Lay out the factors, something like that. You don't need to go back and forth forever, but what's important? What are the important things for me to know as I consider this decision? Let it be okay initially for you to say, this is my decision, because that'll make it safe for them. If they feel like they're going to make it, the decision's on them, again, scary. So it's safety. Safety comes from choice and making it small. And that was the other thing. I heard you say, I want to push them into blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
I would shy away from that word. Replace push with invite. I open the door, I'm inviting them to this level of thinking. Keyword, because invitation, you can always say, yeah, no thanks. And you got to respect that. And some of the guys on your team will say, no thanks for a long time. It'll be very frustrating, but some of them are going to walk through the door. So so what your job is to invite them, and then hopefully they take it. It'll be consistent. And what they're going to have to see is the first time someone states, hey, here's what I recommend, or actually does it, and it doesn't work out, what they're all going to wonder is what happens to that person. So that'll be real important.
David, we have a question from Christy Merritt.
Christy.
Yeah, hello, everyone. Great discussion. It's been interesting. I'm interested in a little bit more about intent for cultural change and broader scale efforts versus intent for more discrete decisions. And as I've been listening today, my question it was really well formed before we started, but now I'm thinking in a million different directions. So I don't know if you have any words about longer, like cultural, on our team, we're always trying to approach things from a stance of humble professionalism. And I think a lot about how do I convey that consistently the intent of that. Like, what does that look like?
Okay, what do you guys do?
We're a wildland fire management team. So
Wildlife. Say again.
Wildfire suppression.
Wildfire suppression. Okay, smoke jumpers.
Sort of.
Okay.
Ground based.
All right. Well, thank you for that. You guys have had a couple busy seasons.
Yeah.
Well, I like the phrase humble professionalism, because that evokes to me this idea that we are professional, but we might not necessarily know everything. Our short answer to cultural things, and might not be quite in the bullseye of where you're going with the question, but is we act our way to new thinking. So the question we would ask when we deal with an organization is, we do an activity like this typically. A bunch of executives, fill in the blank. I would like my team to be more blank. I would like the culture to be more something like that. And they'll write words like more collaborative, more humble, act like humble professionals. Okay, great. Now, question number 2, Wisli, WWISLI. What would it sound like if? So then we say, what would it sound like if people were humble professionals? And the answers usually come out. The first round sounds like, well, we would. They're vague. Like, well, we would ask questions, and then we go back to say, well, can you put that in a scenario or write a script? And what we're trying to do is get something very specific and tangible that people can use. In the weekly operations meeting, when somebody states an opinion which is counter to what I thought, instead of A, I do B. Instead of challenging them or defending my position, I ask a question. I ask a question out of curiosity to explain more what they're seeing. Something like that. So you end up with this very specific, what does it sound like in the office? Now, the value of that is it's something you can practice, and through practice, it will then become that way. And in 6 months from now, we'll say, oh, look, we're all acting like there's a sense of humble professionalism. But my thinking on culture change is that it's overcomplicated by the culture change industry. And I don't know what else to say about it than that, but
act your way to new thinking.
Yeah, act your way to new thinking, and for us, it's all about the words. You just once you get to you're trying to find the smallest Lego block that builds your culture, and it's the words that you say. And this is the one this is the one you have a lot of control over, but this is the one that people neglect. And it starts with you changing your words, you changing the way you ask questions. So that's our thing. What else you guys got?
I think that's about it, everybody. It's 3:30. We are gonna wrap up here. Thanks everybody for coming out today.
Yeah. Hey, yeah. Thanks everyone. So last week we talked about the 6 R's. Hope you guys are surviving quarantine well. And go ahead and put your comments out in the YouTube channel. And send your feedback to me, David at Turn the Ship Around, Chuck at Turn the Ship Around, Andy at any of us at Turn the Ship Around. Let us know how it's going for you, and I hope you're all staying well.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, David. Everybody have a great day, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you all.
Thank you. See you.